All right, I have no opening remarks. I'm just available for questions.
Yet again, you were the star of the Republican show, it seems, and their button as well. Can you, again, just address that? And have you gotten any flack from any Democrats to say, hey, we're taking so much heat because of you, or it sounds like a lot of applause in there?
Well, as I understand it, the Republicans were talking in terms of term limits and connecting me with term limits. And my position on term limits has been straightforward for a long time. I support term limits as administered by the voters. We had a real good example of how term limits as administered by the voters happened in the last primary, where I was a candidate for renomination as a Democratic candidate for state representative. The Rauner Republicans spent over $1 million to try and defeat me in my district, and they failed. And so in my view, that's how term limits works when it's administered by the voters. Rauner Republicans spend $1 million in a Democratic primary in my House district. They failed. I got 65% of the vote.
Mr. Speaker, what do you make of this idea from the governor about this machine that Democrats run that he says has run state government into the ground and is even responsible for violence in the city of Chicago?
Well, you're familiar with the governor. You know, he as I said inside in this meeting, he deals in the extreme. So in terms of the Illinois budget making, he attempted to deal in the extreme. In terms of his politics and his campaigning, he deals in the extreme. And I've said consistently that, in my judgment, the people of Illinois are not extreme people. They're mainstream people. And when we get to the election in November, I think Illinoisans are going to vote to reject extremism of Trump and the extremism of Rauner.
Yesterday, Leader Durkin said that before Democrats try to claim the middle class as their own, that they should apologize to the middle class for what you've done to them. Any thoughts there?
I would just go back to the extreme Rauner agenda, which would reduce the benefit levels in workers' compensation, deny the right to public workers to engage in collective bargaining on wages,
But you're talking about
and
going forward.
repeal
He's
the
talking about
prevailing
history.
wage for those that work in the construction industry. That's their agenda. That's what they want to do. They're very open about that. They don't keep any secrets. My view is that's against the middle class. That's against the recent history of America. I'm not going to support a government being used to lower the wages and the standard of living of the middle class, or to drive injured workers to welfare or to the emergency room.
The governor also says that he's going to field the biggest ground game that's ever been seen in Illinois House races, and Democrats are going to be hit with something the likes of which have never been.
I expect that Illinoisans will feel a ground game in opposition to the extremism of Trump and in opposition to the extremism of Rauner. So everybody ought to just take it all in. And once we get to Election Day, I think Illinoisans, everyday Illinoisans will launch a ground game to move away from extremism and settle into moderation.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, you had said in there that the governor's acceptance of a stopgap was admittance of failure on his part. He has said, though, that he's prepared to pick up the turnaround agenda again after November. So where does that leave us in a few months?
Well, I think that's something that you could spend some time with the governor. And you could argue to the governor that there's a history here. And you can learn from history or you cannot learn from history. And he could learn from history that Illinois is not ready for his extreme agenda. Illinois is not ready for a Rauner extreme agenda, which reduces the wages and the standard of living of the middle class and sends injured workers to welfare and the emergency room.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Durbin today said again that he's focused on this campaign with Secretary Clinton and the other Democratic candidates, but he also was highly critical of Governor Rauner and the direction in which he's moving the state. Do you think he would make an excellent opponent for Governor Rauner in a couple of years?
You're trying to take me into the next governor's election, and I'm really focused on today
But you're focused on this governor and trying to defeat him.
and the ordinary, everyday Illinoisan ground game in the November election, which I think will be formidable.
One of the things the governor repeated yesterday is the cronyism, the insider deals, and all of that stuff. It's basically saying that Democrats and the special interests who support them are doing this for themselves and not for the people. He said that he talked again about how some of the top Democrats make money off property taxes. Is this true? Do you respond to it? Is it useful in the fight?
Again, I think what you'll find is that a combination of Trump extremism and Rauner extremism is going to be responsible for a very formidable
Sir, I'm sorry,
ground
I can't hear you.
game.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It would be responsible for the formation of a very formidable ground game in the November election, which will reject the extremism of Trump, the extremism of Rauner, and state very explicitly that Illinois wants to move in moderation.
Given the fact that you just told this, the Democratic breakfast again, that we are going to stand strong against what you call the extreme changes that Rauner wants, the agenda, and that he says that after the election, he's hoping to push forward turnaround agenda. Are we going to go 4 years with no budget because of this? What happens after the election, no matter who wins or doesn't win seats?
Let me go back to what I said through the last year and a half. Everybody should be reasonable. Everybody should function in moderation. Illinois has a history of Republican governors and Democratic legislatures working together, working in reasonable terms, working in moderation. So Governor Thompson, for a big majority of his time, worked with a Democratic legislature. Governor Edgar worked with a Democratic legislature. Governor Ryan worked with a Democratic legislature. Both sides were reasonable. Both recognized that each had their legitimate positions to be advanced, and they ought to be advanced. But there ought to be some coming together in the middle. And that's what happened under previous Republican governors. It could happen here. But again, Illinois is not interested in extremism. Illinois is not interested in the Trump extremism. Illinois is not interested in the Rauner extremism.
Speaker, one of the Republican committeemen talked for a while yesterday morning about, as Bernie was saying, your law practice, and this notion that it's not illegal, but that it's not right for somebody in your position to be making a living that way, in addition to being speaker. So is that just something that a regular person, that you're advantaged by because you're a top politician in this state?
None other than the Chicago Tribune examined 20 years of filings by my law office. And by the way, any filing done by my law office is a public record because they're filed with the local assessor, they're filed with the Board of Review. So it's all a public record. And the Tribune assigned 4 to 5 reporters. They spent a great deal of time examining 20 years of filings, and one of them said to Steve Brown, "We never found any impropriety here. We never found an instance where someone said, we're going to retain your office to get some advantage with state government or going the other way. It just never happened." And there's a person right here who can speak to all of this.
Mr. Speaker, the Republicans are spending an awful lot of money around the state trying to tie members of your caucus and members of the Democratic caucus in the other chamber to you, going on TV since May with commercials.
Yeah.
How is the Democratic Party going to respond to that in the coming days?
They're doing that because they don't want to talk about themselves. They don't want to talk about the record of the Republican Party nationally, the record of the Republican Party here in Illinois, because they know that the National Republican Party under Trump and the Illinois Republican Party under Rauner is a Republican Party of extremism, and that Illinoisans are prepared to reject extremism. So naturally, they don't want to talk about themselves, they want to talk about somebody else. My judgment is, Illinoisans are intelligent people. They'll take it all in, and then on Election Day in November, they'll vote against the extremism of Trump, the extremism of Rauner. They'll vote for moderation.
Has the party had to adjust its strategy? I mean, the governor brought unprecedented resources to the table for his party. What has your party had to do to respond to that?
We're going to carry our message of protection of the middle class, protection of wage levels and standard of living of the middle class, protection of injured workers. That's going to be our message, and we're going to carry a message of responsible budget making, and we're going to carry a message which would say that we don't think that the people that I set out in my remarks earlier should be held hostage because someone's trying to advance a radical extreme agenda.
As you know, Dan Proft has started a series of newspapers across the state. There was one in Southern Illinois. You were in the headline. It's like Madigan blocks help to the middle class or something. Do you have any opinion of those? I'm not exactly sure how they're funded. What do you know, and do you have?
That's all part of Rauner Republicanism. That's all part of Rauner Republicanism. The people that were against me in my Democratic primary in my district were Rauner Republicans. The $1 million that was brought into my district in the Democratic primary came from Rauner Republicans. That's all part of their method. My judgment is they'll be rejected once the people get their chance to vote.
Mr. Speaker, what's being done behind the scenes on a full budget or pension reform? Or do you expect to begin addressing that this fall with only 6 days?
Discussions are ongoing.
Who's involved in those?
At my request, at the end of the session, at the end of June, at my request, the governor has continued to have his working groups meet. And so they're meeting. They're talking about budget making, they're talking about other issues which are brought before the groups and where the governor has designated a working group to work in that particular area.
Any cross-party leadership meetings?
To the extent that people are participating in the working groups.
Mr. Speaker, what was your reaction to Governor Rauner's veto message on the automatic voter registration last week?
I would have liked to have been in the room when he told the Republican leaders that he was going to veto a bill that they supported.
Do you, he talked about.
But he's very practiced at that. That happens quite a bit, between he and the Republican leaders.
Do you foresee an override, either in November?
If the Republicans have enough courage to stand on their conviction when they voted for the bill at initial passage. So there were numerous Republicans that voted for that bill on initial passage. When there's a motion to override, they'll have an opportunity to show who they're with their conviction at the time of initial passage or after they've had some conversations with the governor,
Is there any chance?
agents of the governor.
Is there any chance of a special session that would do the override in time to get the
The effective-
700,000 voters back on the rolls?
The effective date on the bill is January of 17. So you see, if there were an override today, the bill would not be in place for this November
I
election.
thought there was a component about, David Orr was talking about 700,000 incorrectly registered voters would instantly be eligible to vote in November if the bill were.
I asked my staff, what's the effective date of the bill? And it was January of 17.
Mr. Speaker, you're trying to tie together Mr. Trump and Mr. Rauner.
No, I'm not trying, they are. They're
Okay,
tied
well,
together.
you're-
There's full documentation.
Okay, well, you're
Excuse
saying
me,
that they
just one
share-
second. There's
Okay.
full documentation that Rauner supports Trump. Now, Rauner is working to destroy all that evidence. He's trying to run away from it. But he committed to support Trump. There are two peas in a pot, they're joined at the hip.
Talk about
What
the
documentation?
documentation.
What?
Full media statements and full media reports. I mean, you'd believe the media, wouldn't you?
Yep. Well,
Sometimes.
what do you make though of the governor repeatedly trying not to say whether he supports Trump? We asked him just yesterday and he refuses to say. Why do you think
He
that
won't
is?
even say Trump's name. It's like Voldemort to say, he who shall not be named.
Yeah, right, sure.
People yesterday said that Hillary Clinton will also hurt, and perhaps in Southern Illinois districts where Trump might be more popular. Are you fully in support of Hillary Clinton, and how do you think she will play in?
What's that name again?
I heard it was Hillary.
I support Hillary Clinton. I'm going to support her right through the election. I think she's going to carry Illinois. I think she's going to be the next president of the United States.
Will it hurt Democrats downstate potentially though to have her at the top of the ticket?
I don't think so because, in America, there's always a choice. And so all Illinoisans, regardless of where they live, will have a choice between Hillary Clinton and the extremism of Donald Trump and Bruce Rauner. And I think, given that choice, that Illinoisans all across the state are going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and they're going to vote for the Democratic ticket.
Mr. Speaker, you've been around a long time. You've defeated a lot of opponents. You seem to be taking a victory lap today. You have a positive posture about what's going to happen in November. Has Governor Rauner made you uncomfortable at all? And how have you changed since having him as governor as your main
It's
How
been
has he
very,
changed you?
it's been very interesting. It's been very interesting. It's been different, but it's very interesting.
Governor, excuse me, Speaker, you've described the governor.
The name is
I know,
Rauner.
I know.
And extremism.
That's what I was gonna say. You've described the governor as extreme so many times.
Sure.
But by your own logic, you know, isn't it kind of magical thinking to assume that he's gonna maybe one day turn into the Republican governors of the past that you talk about, who've been able to work with a Democratic legislature?
That's a decision to be made by Governor Rauner. In America, under the American Constitution and the state constitutions, we have divided government. And that's what we have in Illinois. The constitutions, in their own language, and then through the statutory supports and through court decisions, are very explicit that in this country, why there's expected to be a robust debate and a robust exchange of ideas. And then the people would say, in the end, having worked through that robust debate, there would be some coming together of the minds. And so that's the point that I would make. I don't want you to think, and clearly I've never said that I wouldn't compromise on any of these issues. So the issues that I've set out, the extreme positions of Rauner, workers' compensation, collective bargaining, prevailing wage, I've never said that I'm not prepared to compromise. Both chambers of the legislature have passed bills which would change workers' compensation. The House passed the bill, the Senate passed the bill. The key feature in the House bill on workers' compensation is to provide that Illinois would join a majority of states in the nation and go toward rate regulation on the insurance companies that sell workers' compensation insurance. The majority of states in America provide for state regulation of the insurance companies that sell workers' compensation insurance. We have in hand studies which clearly show that the cost of workers' compensation in Illinois has come down since the reforms of 2011. So the costs have come down, but the rates for the coverage have not come down. The rates for the coverage are in the hands of the insurance companies. And so a key feature of the House bill would be to say, let's join a majority of the states and let's go to rate regulation on workers' compensation insurance companies. That's an example of where there could be a compromise. There could be an agreement.
Mr. Speaker, peak positivity probably on the last day of June, when you got the stopgap compromise. A lot of nice things were said for first time in a while on both sides of the aisle. Does this break for summer hurt momentum? What are you doing with your caucus or reaching across the aisle to maintain momentum leading into the fall?
Our caucus is united. It's very well informed. They understand these issues. They understand that they're not prepared to use the Illinois government budget making as a hostage. They're not prepared to hold hostage people that need breast cancer screening, people that need prevention on child sexual assault, autism. They're not prepared to participate in that type of hostage taking. They're very clear about that.
Is that an indication you're willing to go stopgap budget to stopgap budget for the next 2 years?
You know, I wouldn't move in that direction. I think what you ought to focus on would be the positions that have been set out by both sides, the willingness of people to compromise, to come to an agreement, which clearly I'm prepared to do. That's the key. That's the key right there.
What needs to happen for us to get a budget signed and passed and signed next year?
Yesterday,
What needs to happen? How do we get there?
Let's start here.
the governor questioned the independence of the judiciary branch to decide fairly the fate of the remap amendment, and I'm wondering if you have any predictions for how this is going to go.
Number one, the Illinois Constitution provides for a three-part government, very clear. So under the Illinois Constitution, there's an executive department, the governor, there's the legislative department, the legislature, there's the judicial department. And threw me off track.
Sorry.
The Constitution's very clear that it's a three-part government, and it provides for an independent judiciary. I'm aware of the case. I don't plan to comment on the case because it's before the Supreme Court. One point I would make is that the plaintiffs in the case are minorities. And they are minorities who are complaining in their filings that the effect of the constitutional amendment would be to repeal the Illinois Voting Rights Act. Well, the Illinois Voting Rights Act provides minorities with certain rights in redistricting. And that constitutional amendment would revoke the rights given to the minorities in the Illinois Voting Rights Act.
Mr. Speaker, Frank Montino is in a tough spot right now. What could you say in his support?
I'm aware that there's 2 ongoing investigations of Mr. Montino, and my expectation is that at the end of the investigations, he'll be fully vindicated.
But I mean,
I don't know anything about the details of the
but
investigation.
you supported him on a regular basis, and going forward, what would be your?
Well, that's why I expect that he'll be fully vindicated. That's my expectation.
Mr. Speaker, what do you say to the people who look at the fiscal state of Illinois and look at you as a person who's been around Illinois government for longer than pretty much anybody else and want to lay the blame for all of that at your feet?
Yeah. I would say that the number one problem facing the government of the state of Illinois is the budget deficit. The number one problem facing the government of Illinois is not workers' compensation, it's not collective bargaining, it's not prevailing wage, it's the budget deficit. And after you layer on top of the current budget deficit, structural deficits which have been carried forward, and you layer on top the aggregate debt load of the state, which is about $34 billion, and you layer on top of that the interfund borrowing that was done and will have to be repaid, and the fact that Comptroller Munger has stated that she expects sometime during the summer that the amount of unpaid bills will reach about $10 billion. I think all of that says that we ought to get about the business of balancing the budget. And I've said consistently, I don't think you can just cut your way out of the budget deficit problem. I think you need a balanced approach. You need some cuts, you need some new revenue. And that's where I would say that if you want to talk about new revenue, let's talk about taxation of millionaires.
Can you just once again explain your involvement with the remap case? Obviously, with Mike Casper there as the attorney and a lot of the allies as part of it, are you really not involved?
I'm not a party to the case, and as I said earlier, most of the parties to the case, most of the plaintiffs to the case are minorities, okay? Minorities that are parties to that case clearly see the impact upon minorities that would happen as a result of that constitutional amendment. That's why they filed a lawsuit.
Did you help them organize? Were you involved at all in the effort to say, hey, bring on Casper, anything like that?
Again, the plaintiffs in the case, and you can go to the filing and you can see their names, they're intelligent people, and they're aware of lawyers in Illinois who are good lawyers and can make good arguments before the court system. So they found Michael Casper. Mr. Casper has a good, solid reputation as a competent lawyer, and I'm sure that's why they sought him out.
Do you have any problem, sir, with the governor or the independent people who created this foundation for the fairgrounds, which was done this week and announced at the fair on Ag Day?
We're interested and we're concerned with procurement rules. So had that been done under the Illinois statute, there'd be a set of procurement rules which were put in place after the Blagojevich scandal on purchasing. And we're interested to know, will this group be subject to those strong purchasing rules?
And do you anticipate any action in the legislature one way or another about this?
Haven't gotten to that point yet.
Or are there any other options? Is it just pass a bill to say you can't do it, or what are the next steps?
Well, the governor could come in before the legislature and suggest let's create this not-for-profit group. I believe the Department of Conservation has one. And let's work with the legislature and let's provide that we have good, strong procurement rules in place.
Can we go back to my question? What needs to happen? How do we get a budget passed and signed?
Everybody's got to be reasonable and function in moderation.
I've heard that.
He's heard it before. He says it in his sleep. But I think we're about ready to say thank you for your time.